I guess I was fairly apprehensive the whole time that I was flying in combat. And I guess there's good reason to feel that way. I'm there to cause a lot of damage and a lot of harm, and therefore they would like to damage me. And I was 25 years old at that time. Top Gun was really a thrill. I must have done well in actual combat because at the time I was just a lieutenant junior grade, which is a first lieutenant in the Air Force. And so I may have been the very first lieutenant junior grade to go through Top Gun. That was the dream of a lifetime come true. I had wanted to be an aeronautical engineer and a test pilot just like my dad from the time I was 10 years old. STS-27 was my third launch. And it was only the second launch after the Challenger accident. Well, I will never forget, we maneuvered the arm, and Mike Mullane was my arm operator, so he moved the arm over there, and we brought up the television image of the right wing, and I looked at what I was seeing, and I said to myself, we are gonna die. To be an airline pilot, there was mandatory age 60 retirement. I was a NASA astronaut until I was 50 years old. And so I looked at the situation, and I had known a number of Southwest airline pilots. And they were just like me. They were flying because they loved to fly. Well, there's a lot of piloting that goes into it, a tremendous amount of piloting that goes into it, because you're going to wind up passing other airplanes. You're going to get in a duel with another airplane that's fairly closely matched. So there's a ton of satisfaction from doing that. And hey, let's just talk about the racing itself. It's fun to fly low, but it's dangerous.
Keep 'em flying, keep 'em in keep 'em flying, hitting hard and high. On every lip the fervent cry, keep 'em flying, Uncle Sam, keep 'em flying. Every headline screams, keep 'em flying. Army fighting teams on 30,000 different beams, keep 'em flying, Uncle Sam.
The motto of the Warbirds of America is keep 'em flying. Most of the warbirds we see at air shows and other events are owned by private individuals or nonprofit organizations, not by governments, and it takes a lot of knowledge, skill, and effort, and hard cash to restore and fly these aircraft. We are deeply indebted to the determined individuals who take on that challenge. Every warbird represents a piece of history, and the goal of the Warbirds of America is to help owners, mechanics, and pilots to restore these aircraft and to share their history by keeping them flying.
We are in awe of what they can do, and we're eternally grateful for what they have done. In reality, they are inanimate machines with neither souls nor personalities. Yet, something happens when they roar to life. Numerical designations on blueprints and spreadsheets somehow become Mustangs. Flying fortresses. Lightnings. Jugs. Liberators.
The idea for a club focused on warbirds was first tossed around at the Reno Air Races in 1964. Walt Ohlrich Jr. was a Navy commander and a pilot who also raced a Grumman F8F Bearcat. Walt and several of his friends got together and formed the Warbirds of America, incorporated in 1966 with Ohlrich as its first president. Walt is credited with coining the term Warbird. Walt Ohlrich caught the aviation bug early in life. His father flew P-40 Warhawks in the Pacific War and B-25s after the war. Back home, Walt's father bought a surplus PT-17 Stearman biplane and taught Walt to fly. The young Walt soloed the Stearman in 1946, the same day he joined the Navy's Aviation Midshipman Program. In the Navy, he served as a combat pilot, flight instructor, test pilot, and squadron commander, and flew many of the Navy's trainers and frontline combat aircraft. He was a production test pilot for the Douglas A-4 Skyhawk and later flew A-4s in Vietnam from the carrier USS Intrepid. Later during the Vietnam War, he commanded a Skyhawk squadron aboard the USS Shangri-La. He finished his 33-year Navy career as a captain and as commander of the Nuclear Weapons Training Group Atlantic. His awards include 5 Air Medals, a Navy Commendation Medal, a Meritorious Service Medal, and the Distinguished Flying Cross. Every man needs a hobby, and while Walt was actively serving the Navy, he got his hands on a war surplus Bearcat and was one of 7 pilots to fly in the very first Reno Air Races in 1964. He raced that Bearcat until 1971 and served on the Reno Air Races Contest Committee for nearly 20 years. Back in 1965, when Walt co-founded the Warbirds of America, he also bought himself a surplus North American SNJ Navy Advanced Trainer. Walt first flew SNJs at Pensacola, Florida during his Navy flight training. (1967) was a notable year for Warbirds of America. In the beginning, membership in the club was limited to owners of World War II combat aircraft. Still, membership grew quickly thanks to the efforts of its founders. In 1967, the club expanded to include the SNJ and its Army Air Force's cousin, the T-6 Texan, and membership swelled. In 1967, the Warbirds of America became a division of EAA. And in 1967, Walt Ohlrich got assigned to a combat tour in Vietnam, and Pete Bruscia, one of the Warbirds' regional presidents, stepped up to head the organization. In the years that followed, more aircraft types were surplused by the military, and more historic Warbirds were recovered from all over the world and made flyable again. Membership continued to rise as aircraft types were added, and membership was open to Warbird enthusiasts. Walt Ohlrich remained active in the organization, writing safety articles and training and mentoring scores of Warbird pilots. After he retired from the Navy, Walt flew with the Barnstormers air shows, the Geico Skytypers, the Military Aviation Museum, and the U.S. Navy Legacy Flight Program. He was inducted into the Warbirds of America Hall of Fame and Virginia Aviation Hall of Fame. The North American Navy SNJ Advanced Trainer was accepted by the Navy in December 1943 and sent to Corey Field, an auxiliary field just north of Pensacola Naval Air Station in Florida. It spent World War II with several Atlantic training squadrons, and then several decades with various Naval Reserve units before it was delisted and put in storage in Arizona in August 1957. A year later, it passed to the first of 11 private owners before Walt Ohlrich bought it in 1966 for a mere $2,150, about $12,000 in today's money. It went into storage while Walt was in Vietnam. 502 was the Modex number of Walt's A-4 Skyhawk in Vietnam, and when he returned home, he re-registered the SNJ as November 502 and painted it in the legacy Navy scheme we see today. Over the years, 502 became the best-known SNJ in the country, appearing at air shows and aviation events nationwide. In 2006, as Walt was preparing to hang up his wings, he sold 502 to John Mazza, nicknamed Pappy, Walt's friend and fellow pilot in the Military Aviation Museum. Walt Ohlrich passed away, went west, as aviators say, in 2014. As a tribute to his mentor, colleague, and friend, Pappy vowed to preserve 502's famous paint scheme for another 50 years.
Good afternoon, folks. Welcome to Warbirds in Review for this afternoon. This is about Walt Ohlrich and also about Warbirds of America. On our left here, to my left, is Pappy Mazza. He's the owner of 502 here, as you saw on here. He's a volunteer pilot for the Military Aviation Museum in Virginia Beach, Florida, Virginia. He has 5,000 hours. He flies numerous aircraft up there, but he primarily flies the Spitfire Mark 9. Is that correct? And he's here to talk about the founder of Warbirds of America, Walt Ohlrich. Jack Harrington over here, he is an ex-president of the Warbirds of America. He's a aviation lawyer, a well-known musician.
I'll be up there tonight, by the way.
And he has owned numerous Warbirds over the years. First of all, let me ask you a question. You tell us a little bit about Walt.
Walt Ohlrich, I met him in the summer of '72, right before I was getting ready to leave to go to officer candidate school. And some reason or other, we just hit it off. We really did. You know, I told him what I was getting ready to do, and he gave me some fatherly advice. And then when I got back, I saw him more and more, and I was starting to do air shows and so forth. And so I'd see him at air shows. I was flying a pit special, doing aerobatics and aerobatic competition. And then, you know, Walt, he was influential with me with racing, because I raced the Formula and Formula Vs. Couldn't afford the Mustangs and Bearcats. They were a little bit out of my budget at the time. But he was one of the best pilots. No, he probably was the best pilot, he and my dad, that I ever flew with. His way of teaching was so smooth and easy. No hollering, no screaming, no trying to humiliate you or anything. It was totally professional, and his famous saying was, you know, you might want to try it like this. It'll probably work a lot better. And every time it did, trust me, it really did. I know I was working on a formation card, because back in the day, you didn't need formation cards. You just went up and flew formation. But then they came out with, they wanted all pilots to have a formation card, which was a good thing. And so I was getting a check ride with Walt to get my card. And I remember landing, one of our first landing, and I got the tail up. We're going down a runway, and I feel a throttle coming back. I said, Walt, is that you? He says, yeah, it might be a little bit easier if you try it this way. I said, okay, whatever. Because here I'm flying with Warbird 1, the founder of Warbirds of America. And everybody called him Warbird 1. And who was I to question what he would suggest? You know, he never told me what to do. He always made suggestions to do things. And I think that's what really made it so enjoyable flying with him. And he could do things with that SNJ that 99% of the pilots that fly these planes can't do. They truly cannot do it. He was a magician with it. I don't know how far you want me to keep going on
Keep
it.
talking. We got lots of time.
Okay. He was, we were up flying one day. I was in front, he was in the back, and we were just up flying. And he says, put it in a good bank. He said, let's start pulling. So I'm pulling. He said, pull it harder, pull it harder, pull it harder. And we all knew what was going to happen. She snapped and went over, and it took a good amount of altitude to recover. He says, try it like this. And so he took it, and he's pulling, snapped, went over. I don't know how he did it, but he ended up coming almost right back to where we were. And that's supposed to be impossible to do, but he did it. I says, do that again, Walt. How'd you do it? He said, oh, it's easy. Just follow through with me. Well, I've done it 1,000 times, and I still can't do it like he could. But that was just some of the things he could do. I mean, he could make that plane dance and just do whatever he wanted with it.
Well, now he wrote a book also, right?
He wrote the book called The Pilot Maker. He and Jeff Ethel wrote the book together. The whole history of the plane, the flying characteristics of it. And it is truly a must-read for anybody that's going to fly this airplane. Not this one. I'm not letting anybody fly this one, other than my son right there. He flies it all the time.
By the way, this is Johnny Mazza. He is the son of. You sure he's your son?
I know he's a lot more handsome, a lot bigger, muscular. But he works out.
He's also a volunteer pilot for the museum in Virginia Beach, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about the T6 as far as its ability as a trainer later on in the show here.
Okay. So, it was having a mentor like that. My dad flew L-Force in World War II, and my dad and I would fly, I can't tell you how much. It was almost like every day. We had a grass runway there at our home. After the war, my dad retired with a medical injury from World War II. He bought a little air coupe. He loved the air coupe. He went into Macy's department store in the 40s, late 40s, and there in the department store in New York City was an air coupe. And he just fell in love with it. It doesn't have rudder pedals or anything, so he ended up buying one, and that's what I learned to fly in, a little air coupe. And at 5 years old, I could start it, taxi it, take it off, land it, because it didn't have rudder pedals. I just needed a lot of cushions to sit on so I could see over the instrument panel.
That must have been something to be trained to use rudder pedals later on.
Yeah, and the next step, rudder pedals, that was easy.
Well, if you don't know how to use rudder pedals, you don't want to fly this airplane.
Yeah, no. You've got to learn how to use your feet with planes like this. And it was a pleasure. We talked earlier. We've got, a lot of good T6 pilots out there. And the ones that are really good had mentors like Walt. Nowadays you can be an instructor pilot, go get your tailwheel endorsement, and you can fly a T6. And if you're an instructor pilot, you can instruct in it. And that's probably the most dangerous thing in the world, flying this airplane. This airplane, sometimes you will do 100 landings and it's like a cub. And then you do one landing and it slaps you because it knows you're getting a little too cocky.
It's got you.
Down at the museum one day, Obie O'Brien, who was actually Walt's best friend, Obie flew in the Navy as well. He was also a S&J instructor at Pensacola. He's walking in one day and he'd been up flying the S&J. He flew the Corsair. We called him the Corsair guy because he had so much time in it. He flew it in Korea and so forth. And I said, Obie, how was the flight? He said, she tried to kill me. I said, what? He said, yeah, she decided to depart off the runway. It was everything I could do to stop her. And I'm thinking, here's a guy with all these hours, went to Pensacola, trained students in Pensacola, flew Corsair, and he had a hard time with an S&J. I don't stand a damn chance with this thing, So anyway, that's pretty much, about Walt. I always called him a good Southern gentleman. I never heard him. Did you ever hear him raise his voice at all? No. Ever. And he was always smiling and happy. Of course, he could fly all the airplanes he wanted to, so I guess that would make you smile all the time as well.
Well, bringing that up, tell us how you happened to acquire this particular airplane.
Okay, back in 2005, I think it was, I got a call from a friend of mine. He says, have you ever thought about flying down at the Military Aviation Museum? And it's 90 miles from my home.
Yeah.
I said, I never even heard of it. And he says, well, it just was a little building out at the Norfolk Airport, but now they bought the Virginia Beach Airport, which was a grass runway, and a general aviation field, and they've just built this big museum there. I said, no, what do they have? And he started telling me the planes they had there. I said, oh my God, that sounds like heaven. He said, well, do you know Walt? I said, I know Walt real well. He says, well, let me tell Walt you're interested. And, Walt never mentioned it to me. And so I get a call from Walt, and he says, hey, Johnny, you interested in flying down here at the museum? I said, I'd love to fly down there. He said, well, why don't you come on down? We've got a little air show this weekend, and you can go around and take a look. So I did, and he invited me to an interview. It was he, Ray Scott, and Don Anklin, the chief pilot at the time. And my interview didn't go well, not at all. Don asked me, he says, how much tailwheel time do you have? And I think I had, God, I don't know, a couple, 3,000 hours of tailwheel time. He says, and what? I says, pit specials. And I went through the whole list. He said, any T6 time? I says, yeah, I got about 18 hours that I was able to get while I was in college. He says, what'd you think of flying it? And I says, it was like a big cub. Woo, that was the wrong thing to say right there. I had him look at me. He says, I don't think you've ever flown one. I said, I have. I'll have to disagree with you. So we ended the conversation, and I get a call a couple of days later from Ray Scott. He said, Johnny, Walt and I want you to fly here. You just need some more heavy tailwheel time. And I said, okay, then I want to fly there. I'm going to go buy a T6. And he says, what? I said, I'm going to go buy a T6. I don't care what it takes. So I'm at a pilot meeting, and I don't know if Rick's in here or not. You in here, Rick? Anywhere? Oh, there he is up the top of the bleachers, Rick Henshaw. We're at the meeting together, and I was telling him I was looking for a T6 or SNJ. And Rick says, I always wanted one of those. You want a partner? I says, love to have a partner. You know? And then another buddy who was standing next to him says, if you need a third one, I'll do it. And so we all agreed. We all put in the money, equal money, and we hadn't put the money in yet. So I'm going on looking for them. And I called Walt, and I says, Walt, you know anybody's got one for sale? He says, no, I really don't. So I looked for about a month, went to Florida and looked at one, went all over. And out of the blue, Walt calls me. He says, Johnny, you still looking for a T6 or SNJ? I says, yeah. He says, want to buy mine? I went, yeah, we'll buy it. It's sold. He says, you don't even know what I want for it. I said, I don't care. You're the most honorable man like my dad. Whatever the price will be, I know it'll be fair. He says, well, I want to put a new annual inspection on it. I want to put a new battery in it for you, so you know everything is tip-top on it. And he says, give Don a call and talk to him about what he thinks is a fair price. So I called Don, and Don said, what do you think? I said, Don, you tell me. And he did, and I'll say, he said, how about $140,000? I said, sold. I told Walt a couple of weeks ago it was sold. We'll buy it. And he said, all right, well, I'm going to do the annual. Give me a couple of weeks, and we'll have it ready. So, funny story. I called Rick. I said, we bought a S&J. He said, where? I said, we bought Walt Ohlrich. He says, you're kidding. Well, that wasn't exactly what he said. But in a roundabout way, it was, you're kidding me. And I said, no. He says, oh, my God. He said, that is fantastic. And I don't know how it happened. You were talking to John Fuentes. John is sitting up there next to Rick. John flies at the museum. He's now the Corsair guy at the museum. And John says, yeah, whose airplane did you buy? And Rick's going, I can't tell him because everybody want to buy this airplane. Because Walt told me, he said, I could sell this plane tomorrow. People want this airplane. And Rick says, I don't know the guy's name we're getting it from. Pappy's handling all of this stuff. So now, John, now you know why you never could figure out who it was. You know? And so Walt, he agreed to bring it up to us, you know, at Dinwiddie Airport, Virginia. He came in, did the overhead, perfect overhead, came up and landed, and we're talking about, we signed all the papers, give him the check.
How long had he had this airplane already?
40 years.
40 years.
40 years.
He had flown it for 40 years.
He had flown it for 40 years, other than a short time when he did his tour in Vietnam.
Yeah.
That was it. And, you know, the whole time we were talking, he was just telling us more things about, we didn't do a pre-buy inspection or anything. We didn't even worry about that because we knew Walt had taken care of this. And so he's going over the plane, and he would never take his hand off the leading edge. You know, it was like, you know, a parent seeing their kid go away.
Yeah.
And I don't know, I think Rick and I both said it to him. He says, Walt, we're going to put you on the insurance. Anytime you want a flyer, let us know. We'll bring it down to you. Never took us up on that offer. So anyway, so he's going along, and he says, you see that formation mirror up there? I says, yeah. He says, 140 missions over Vietnam. That mirror was in my Skyhawk. I said, well, Walt, you want to take that? He said, no, that goes with the airplane. You know, and it was things like that. You would think the guy, that meant a lot to him. So I'm giving him a ride back, and we're in the car, and because the storms were coming up, we didn't want to fly it back. And Walt goes, oh, I forgot to tell you something about the plane. And I'm going, oh God, must have got a cracked spar or something in it. He says, one day, bring a big trailer down to my house. I got a garage full of extra parts for her. We filled up a 20-foot cargo trailer of S&J parts. You name it, spinners, parts that you could never find again, where he would just collect them and collect them and collect them.
Over the years.
So we're there, so we get it, loading up. Rick was with me. We also took Paul Galani. Paul flew A7s in Vietnam, and Paul was shot down in, I believe it was 65, and he was POW for almost 7 years, and he went with us. And he and Walt had known each other through the Navy. So we're sitting in the Oceana Oak. First of all, we're pulling into the parking lot, and the signs say 06 or higher for parking, which, you know, the Air Force 06, a bird colonel, the Navy, it's a captain. And Walt's going by all these parking places, and I'm saying, Walt, you can park here. He says, no, I'm retired. This is for the active duty guys. I said, it doesn't say active. He said, nah, we'll park over here with the civilians. And I mean, that was the character of the guy, that he always wanted to take care of people. So we're sitting in there eating lunch, and he's eating and he's talking, and out of the blue, he sits up and goes, and let me tell you boys something right now. You ever lose an engine in this airplane and you got to put it in the field, don't you dare land it with the gear down. You belly land it. It was made to do that. Now, you know, the other day I was looking at this other plane and just kept going, and that was it, right? So we're walking out, and up on the wall, there's a big portrait up there of a Skyhawk all shot up, and another Skyhawk on its wing. And Cooler, that's Rick's call sign, Cooler said, Walt, do you know anything about that? Walt goes, yeah, I took a picture of it. That's me and the other Skyhawk. He says, and I told the young guy, it was a young ensign, I believe, he said, we're going to fly her back to the boat, but we're not going to land it. We're going to punch out. And they flew back, the kid punched out, and everything was fine over it. But Walt had all types of stories like that, but they would just pop up out of nowhere.
Well, getting back to his naval career, now they covered it a little bit on the video there, but elaborate on a little bit on his naval career.
Well, first of all, you got to think about this. Walt at 16 soloed a steerman. That's what cadet solo, the pilot training back then, was a steerman. So at 16, he was already flying what the entry cadets would be flying in the military. So Walt went through Pensacola. He ended up flying Banshees, and a lot of people don't know this story. They had lost, I don't know, 8 or 10 pilots, and they couldn't figure out why the airplanes were coming apart in the air. And Walt was flying it, and he was up high 20s, thousands of feet, and the right wing blew off of the plane. And I'll come to it in a minute, what they figured out was wrong. But he tries to punch out, and the canopy won't blow. Oh my gosh. And the plane is literally tumbling end over end. And so I don't know how he thought about this. He went to open the canopy with the manual opening, the hydraulic opening, and the canopy opened. And now he punched out. And when he punched out, they were going so fast, I mean, it broke him up pretty bad. He landed in the water, inflated his life raft. He said it took him forever because his arms were banged up. I think he even had a broken arm. He had done something to his lungs, had partial brain damage from the catastrophic, ejection that he was going on. And so he was in a hospital for 6 months during recovery. Made it back, made a full recovery. Went on from there, still flying in the Navy. Ended up, his last plane he flew was the Skyhawk. He loved it. As they're called the Scooter. He said it's a little hot rod, And along the way, while most naval pilots only want to fly the jets, here's Walt driving all over the country, saving World War II airplanes. I mean, he saved Bearcats and Corsairs, and it's a list of these planes that are now in museums around the country that are flying again because of him. There's a friend of ours that was a petty officer that always hung around with Walt because this guy, he was a mechanic down there, was big into World War II airplanes. And he said it would be nothing to be riding around on base. Walt had a convertible with a propeller sticking up out of the back where the Navy had it and it was surplus. And they just said, take it, we don't need it. And he would just get all these parts for these things and kept collecting them and building planes. And I mean, his whole life was dedicated to aviation.
Well, now, did he, when he went to Reno for that first race, was he in the Navy then?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he raced while he was in the Navy.
Okay, so that he had the Bearcat. Where did he get the Bearcat?
I don't know who he bought that from, but think about this. He was a lieutenant in the Navy, and he buys a Bearcat. You know, usually a lieutenant in the Navy back then was just happy to buy groceries. You know, and here he goes out, and, you know, of course, they weren't very much. I have a 1964 Trader Plane magazine, and Mustangs were going for $500 in the crate, brand new. Tri-Pacers were going for $4,000. So you could get a P-51 for $500, but a Tri-Pacer or a little air coupe was $4,000. So it was, things have kind of flipped now. But yeah, even then, he still stayed into flying piston engine, and he raced that Bearcat. He raced this in, I think it was 67 or 68, qualified at 171 miles an hour, and which is really rolling.
That's a lot, yeah.
For that plane. And he always told me, he says, you're going to fly this plane, and you're going to find that most T6s have to have a little bit more power to keep up with you. And we experienced that coming up here. We went up to 10.5, and my son goes, Dad, I don't have any more throttle left. I'm wide open. And so I said, well, I'll back off some. So I backed off of it. But they did something about the wing. I don't know how, the angle or what. And he says, you're always going to be faster in this airplane. And it was. I don't know. He never would tell me what he did. I don't know whether it was not legal or what, but he did it. But yeah, he continued to fly. This was actually, it didn't have a race number. So they always called it race number 50 because of the 502. Mm-hmm. And so that's what it was always, because he did not want to paint a race number on it. And he raced it a number of times.
Well, that's, speaking of 502, why is it 502?
It was 502. You probably didn't catch it, but in the video, when he was standing, you caught it. Okay. You saw when he was in his Skyhawk, the number on his Skyhawk was 502. So when he came back, he wanted that same number on his S&J. And so he filed for that number and got it. And so that's why we're 502.
How to grow delicious tomatoes. Step 1. Feed them while watering with Miracle Grow Liquid Feed. That's it. Miracle Grow. All you need to know to grow.
Jack, give us a little history of the Warbirds of America.
It's interesting how what we see today came together, and it all started back in those days with Walt. He had called it Warbirds of America, organization based in California. And back then he was flying, relative to the Warbirds of America activities, a P-51 Mustang. In fact, P-51 Mustang was the choice of the Warbirds of America. Yeah. Years and years ago, one of our original directors, John Baugh, a lot of you know, yeah, we got a lot of friends out there for John. Our briefing building, of course, named after John. John showed up his first year here in a Stearman, and he comes taxiing down. Of course, this was long ago, and comes taxiing down in this Stearman, and they basically told him to go away, to take that down to Antique and Classic and come back when he had a P-51 Mustang. Well, if you know John Baugh, guess what? The next year, John Baugh was back in a P-51 Mustang. And, of course, Miss Coronado, I think, was John's airplane, if I'm not mistaken. So, but back in the 60s, Walt got in touch with Jerry Walburn. Jerry was a P-51 pilot himself, owned one. In fact, these things that I'm talking about, you can go back to the December of 2021 and the January, February of 2022, and there's an article that Jerry Walburn had dictated, which I edited and wrote, and that's where this information comes from. So you can go back in the magazine and you can read a little bit more detail there. And we've put these on our website as well. As I said, Jerry was an exec with GM in the Buick division. If you think back years and years ago when we all drove Buicks here, that was because of Jerry Waldron. He was able to make that happen for us. So Jerry was involved with Warbirds of America here in the Midwest, and he was bringing a good number of P-51 Mustangs to Rockford, which is where this event was in years past, of course. Paul really wanted, of course, Paul was a member of the Guard, he really wanted to get Warbirds involved in EAA. In fact, so much to the point, and what he did for us, we call him, if you look in the magazine, Distinguished Warbird Leader. Walt is Warbird 1 and Paul is Distinguished Warbird Leader. And he was quite pleased when we gave him that title. But a lot of the EAA members said, why do you want these Warbirds? We're a popular mechanics, home builder type of an organization. And Paul said, we need to diversify. We need to bring more general aviation into EAA. And of course, that vision all those decades ago, just look around you, you can see that obviously that did happen. So Walt was very, very much involved with Warbird owners out west, Arizona, California, Texas. He brought a large group of those P-51 drivers to Rockford. Jerry brought the Midwest contingency, and all of a sudden there was a nucleus out there of people getting to be a pretty good sized group. Walt was very smart. I'm interested you talk about the parts in that, because one of the things that Walt realized that if they were going to keep these airplanes flying, they needed parts, they needed manuals, they needed to know all about the airplane. They needed to make sure that the people flying them could fly them safely, had the proper manuals and training. And that was very insightful of him to do that, because that was part of the impetus for bringing together the Warbirds of America organization so the pilots could take care of those resources. As we said, Walt was called on active duty, and at that point there was another group out there, Bob Hoover. Some of you might have heard of Bob Hoover. Bob was running an organization called the Mustang Pilot Society. So the California contingent of Warbirds, the Midwestern, and then Bob's organization, all of those came together to become Warbirds of America. And again, Rockford was their meeting place. Paul really felt it would be necessary, if Warbirds were to have success, to have a home. And at that time, Paul had the EAA organization over in Hales Corners, Wisconsin, had a small museum over time that grew before they came here. So Paul offered to open up EAA to the Warbirds of America, and they realized, that Warbirds of America, that it made a lot of sense. EAA had a staff, they had print facilities, they could carry out Walt's vision of wanting to get information out to Mustang pilots in the community. And so they eventually organized a corporation here in Wisconsin, and still today is obviously a big part of what we do is the resources and the backup of Warbird aviation. Warbird aviation is not easy. There are a lot of people in governmental positions that do not think that civilians should be flying these airplanes. And of course, in response to that, this is why we have the training, and this is why we have NATA and organizations like that, so that we can bring these resources together and allow for the safe operations. Because as we always talk about the ice cream parlor event out there in California. It was I think it was a jet, wasn't it?
F-86.
And the F-86, and that really threatened the entire Warbird movement. We almost lost it, but because Paul had built such credibility with the FAA in Washington D.C., initially starting from the home builder side, he was able to step up for us and really helped save the operation. Back then, the FAA came up with a new category, the limited category, because these weren't civilian airplanes. Cessna wasn't making them. They were made by North American Aviation for the military. And the limited, it allowed us to fly the airplanes day, night, VFR. You could do instruction. You could basically fly it like a production aircraft, but not for compensation and hire. That limitation even exists today. So again, Paul was able to build that credibility with FAA, make these airplanes useful for us, and that same spirit and that same foresight that Walt had still carries on today with Warbirds of America, working with our advocacy staff that we have here in Oshkosh, We meet with the FAA once a year. They come up here in February. We get them out of DC, and a part of that meeting, it's Sport Aviation Summit, but one of the segments in that meeting every year is about warbirds and warbird issues. So it's great that Walt and Jerry and Paul and Bob Hoover and some of the other individuals who were mentioned in the film had the sense and the presence to think ahead, and we carry that forward to this day. So again, as I say, if you want to go back, get a little bit more detail on this, there's some good stories. One about Jerry Walburn working on his P-51 Mustang canopy in his wife's oven, and that didn't go so well, but I'll let you read about that in the... I guess that thing smelled pretty nasty anyway, so... But yeah, so that's just a little of oversight of how what we see today, how that came together.
Well, I guess it's a good thing that the board of directors have an aviation lawyer to deal with the FAA, right?
Well, I suppose so. Yeah.
Johnny Hollywood. I'll say Hollywood. Tell us a little bit about the T6 as far as how you feel it is as a trainer for bigger airplanes like you fly now.
So the T6 is definitely a good building block. There's no doubt about that. Everybody always used to tell me that, and until, I'm sure everybody, here that, has flown one or hasn't, I'm sure they've heard that the T6 can be a really squirrely airplane. Y'all touched on it earlier. You can fly this airplane 100 hours, do 100 landings, and no issue. And then one day you're out and everything's going great, and you land and it starts drifting one way, and it really lets you know who's in charge, and you need to literally be on your toes constantly when you're flying this airplane. It's not one that when you land and you're still rolling out, you're trying to fiddle with the flaps and all that. You want to, get it completely under control, and off the runway before you start, doing anything else. With that, as far as, me personally, growing up in aviation and, buying my own T6 and flying it, it really teaches you, obviously, a lot of stick and rudder. There's no doubt about that. You're using it constantly on this airplane. Power plant management, people who have never flown a radial and, they're jumping in something like this for the first time, it'll teach you that, to prepare you for the other, bigger warbirds out there. It is the old saying, and it's true, once you fly this, you can pretty much fly everything else. This is definitely harder. Mike Spalding, who's sitting behind us, he's the chief pilot at the museum we fly with. When he checked me out in the AD4 Sky Raider, his exact words were, "It's going to be like a big Cub compared to the T6." So, but yeah, it's definitely a good building block if you're going to get into any of the bigger, faster warbirds. There's no doubt about that.
So you're saying the Sky Raider is a good trainer for the T6?
Pretty much, yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, landing and taking off, other than obviously the torque of the engine, it's a night and day difference. But the, it tracks pretty much straight down the runway, compared to this, you're constantly thinking about it all the time.
Why do they call it the Texan?
So, we were just discussing this earlier, and that's new to me too. I never knew that. So basically, some were obviously where they were built, and also because of the gentlemen that were involved in the development of it were from Texas.
Do you have anything you'd like to add?
No, that was pretty much. He did a good job.
No, how about that? How about anything else?
No, yeah, Johnny hit on it. It's a plane that, it will teach you everything you basically need to move up to any of these airplanes over here. It really will. It's amazing. And I've often heard that the Mustang's a good trainer for the T6.
Yeah.
I've heard that, I don't know from how many people. And,
yeah. Connie Edwards
Mike,
said
our
that.
chief pilot there, he flies them all, everything from Mosquito to 109s and all. And I've heard him say that, on it. And so, yeah, we're very fortunate.
How about you, Jack?
One of the things that I learned that when I first started coming out here in the 70s, I saw what I thought was a T6. But then I learned later that there's some different versions, and why don't you tell the crowd about some of those other versions of the T6?
Well, you've got, like, this is an SNJ5.
Okay, SNJ. Yeah.
Okay, and so the difference between this one and, say, an SNJ4 is that was 12 volt, and this they went to 24 volt. This is a 1943. It has what's called power push on it. So you just don't grab the gear lever and pull it up. You have a lever that you push, and that activates your hydraulic system. Then once your pressure builds, then you can pull it up and your gear will come up. When it comes to putting the gear down, a lot of guys will push the power push and then put the gear down. I never do. I like to put the gear down and let them free fall without the hydraulic system. That way I'm doing an emergency extension basically every time. And then once they're down, I can see the locks, then I hit the power push to bring the pressure up to lock them into place.
Which branch flew the SNJ?
Navy
Navy.
Marines.
Right, and then of course our neighbors up to the north. If you ever see a T6 that's got a big old muffler hanging on the side of it, what do we got going there?
We've got a Harvard. That's what we have there. Couple of things are different on it. First of all, it doesn't have a regular stick. It has what's called a spade grip. Same thing we have in our Spitfire. And it's a round ring, and you hold it like this. Got it in the Mosquito. I think all the British planes had it. Don't you have that in Mosquito? No, you don't. You've got a regular stick in there. And people say, the pilots go, how do you like flying with a ring? I said, how do you drive your car? I said, and the neat thing is the whole stick doesn't move, only this much moves, it pivots. So the Harvards had that same thing with them. And then the model Johnny flies, he flies a G model. And the G models, what they did is after the war, they took the T6s, DCs, whatever, the different models, and they sent them back to North American, and they updated them. They did a number of updates. One of the things is they eliminated that power push. So now, just like a Mustang, you pull the gear up, you put the gear down. So it made it one step. They made it closer to what the cadets would actually be flying in the future. They've got 110 gallons of fuel. G model's got 140 gallons, and that is really nice. Because I
made a big difference coming up here.
Yeah, it did. We had to do an extra stop because of me.
Yeah. Well, and the Harvard was heated, correct? It had a heated cockpit, as I recall.
Well, we do too.
Do you?
Yeah.
Well?
You got two little.
Yeah, it heats your feet.
Yeah, your foot stays
Your feet
really
burn
warm.
up, and the top freezes to death.
And you look at that beautiful blue flame coming out of the.
Oh,
if I could just
at
get
night,
some of that heat inside here, right?
At night, you look at that and you see it and say, God, am I on fire? It's a big flame coming out. But yeah, the G models, they use those, God, all the way through. I can't think up to the mid-50s.
Well, my last class was T6s, and they were G models.
What year?
1954.
Okay, so right after Korea. Pretty much when they switched over. And they went to the T-34.
They went to the T-34. They were disappointed that they went to the T-34 because any idiot could fly a T-34.
We hope there's no T-34 pilots here.
The guys would get out of the T-34, and the ones that went to multi-engine B-25s, they couldn't fly. So the Air Force didn't keep the T-34 very long. But that's another story.
Those are the main differences in the planes. I wouldn't. Oh, one other thing I got to say about Walt and this airplane. One of the agreements he made with me, he says, I'm counting on you to keep your word. I says, what is it? He says, you will never sell this airplane. Oh. He said, I don't want anybody else getting this thing. I don't want it to be junked up. I know you and your boys will take care of it, but don't you ever sell it. And I guess it was, and I said, no, Walt, I said, it'll go to my son.
I guess Johnny was really grinning when he heard
that.
Yeah,
he did like that idea. But he went out and bought his own T6. And then it was, I don't know, Rick, 6-7 years later after we bought it, Rick was trying to work on his formation card, and I'm always flying the plane, and he needed a plane to fly, and we had a great partnership. Our partnership was this: we will never lose our friendship over an airplane, and we never did. And Rick says, I'm gonna buy my own. I want you to buy me out. I said, all right. We're still friends. Oh, hell yeah, we're friends. And the other partner, Charlie Lamb, says, yeah, I want to get out of it too, because he never flew it. He's the best partner in the world. Never flew it, paid us every month. Couldn't beat that guy. So Rick got his, he's got it here, beautiful, painted Marine Corps colors. And I bought it. And prior to me buying them out, we had her painted. And so we didn't say anything to Walt. So when we got it painted, we brought it back. And I called Walt. I said, Walt, what are you doing today? He says, I'm thinking of going to a museum. I said, great, I'm out here. I want you to see 502. I just got it painted. And you could hear silence. Like, what? I says, come on out, you'll love this new paint scheme. So when we were getting it painted, the guy says, you want me to Bondo any dents? I said, nope, you don't touch it. You paint it identical, not even an eighth of an inch off, identical. The dents were in here when it came, they stay in here. So I literally had a blindfold on Walt, walking him out to the plane. I said, all right, take it off. And he took it off. His eyes actually watered. He says, you kept peaches. He always called it peaches. An original paint job, he had peaches on it way back. And I said, yeah, Walt, do you think we would change it? You would kill us if we changed that paint scheme. Now, he did get mad at us one time, but not really mad. He came out. I said, Walt, look, we put red disc brakes on it. He said, why? I gave you like 20 sets of brake shoes, but they were from 1943. They were all dry rotted, no good anymore, so we certainly couldn't use those. Right. But yeah, he was really thrilled with us keeping it, and that would be a dishonor to Walt and to that airplane had we ever changed the color of it. Because y'all saw in the videos, that's going way back to the 60s. Yeah. It looks identical to how it does right now.
Except it's shiny.
Yeah, except it's shiny. We did have a clear coat put on it. We wanted it to look new, as long as possible. So.
Well, thanks for doing that, and I know Walt.
Oh God, yeah.
He'd be so happy to see this.
He's
today.
watching right now.
He's watching.
Yeah, he told me you better not screw this up.
There you go. He was a real gentleman.
In 2014, Walt passed away. Walt went west, and they had him cremated. So it took about a month, and we went out and we did the missing man, and I was flying S3 in 502. Cooler was in the back seat because he had been a partner in it. And my son, you were flying, I think, 2 or 4. And Jackie Dankos was flying, I think, Will Loving's airplane at the time. And Chappie, he was up as a photo shoot, and they did photos and so forth.
But you did the pull, right?
I did the pull.
Well, in that video, it doesn't show you doing the pull. Yeah. That video shows you being the lead.
That might have been when we did a lead change up there.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I did the pull, and as I pulled, I turned smoke on.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. That may not have been the actual funeral.
Well, but anyway, I noticed it. But you didn't do the pull.
Yeah, we had to do the pull with this.
Right.
Oh, and a funny story, we're going out to the hold for the flyover, the missing man, and the wind was beating us. I mean, we were all over the place, and I'm going, what the hell? I can't keep this thing on station. And I said, this wind. And Cooler goes, it's not the wind, it's Walt screwing with you. And I swear, did it not just calm right down after he said that? Walt said, okay, they know I'm doing this.
Good.
So anyway.
Well, I want to thank all of you folks for coming with us today.
Thank you very much.
And good luck with 502.
I appreciate y'all having us too. I know Walt does.
You sure it's not for sale, huh?
Never. Never. I'm dead serious. If you offered me $1 million, I would not take it. I would not take it.
Good.
People go, yeah, you would. No, I would not.
Yeah.
Would not. Could never replace that. So.
Do you have any questions for anybody?
Amen.
Okay, well, thanks a lot. We really appreciate you showing up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.